The following interview with Michelle Hope covers various topics dealing with sexual health. If you have trouble having those tough conversations, then my recommendation is go ahead and plan on taking notes because the information that she shares in this interview, I think you're going to learn a lot from. So let's go ahead and get into the interview. A friend of mine and I, we had a conversation, and our girls are maybe about 2 or 3 getting ready to go into preschool. And so it was like, we want to give them the language that they need to be able to tell us something if something happens, because
Yep,
we're not going to be around them all the time. And she was
yep.
like, well, have you thought of what you're going to say? And I'm like, well, no, because I grew up Blackish and prudish, so to speak.
Oh, wow.
I'm still waiting on my parents to have that sex conversation with me, you
And
know,
you're how old?
too old to still be waiting.
If you see me looking around, because of the age you said, I have a children's book here somewhere. And
Oh,
so that's why if you see me, I'm like trying to see if it's somewhere relatively close to me. Um,
ah,
but I think, there are certain things you should teach at certain times.
mm-hmm,
That 0 to 5 is a really important time to start naming body parts and building in body autonomy
mm-hmm.
so that their body is their choice. There was an Australian woman who went viral because she had said you should ask your children if you can change their diaper. Now, I think she was taken out of context because I don't think it's about asking and little kids running around with shitty diapers. I think it's more about saying, using language like mommy needs to change your diaper now, so I'm going to need to wipe your genitals, instead of saying mommy's going to clean your hoo-ha. It's not a hoo-ha, it's a vulva, or it's a penis, right?
Right.
Um and we wouldn't call a nose, if a child needed to blow their nose or you needed to clean your child's eyes, you wouldn't be like, come here, let me clean your hoo-ha for the nose. So we shouldn't be giving inaccurate body part names to body parts. It just needs to be what it is: a vagina, a vulva, a butthole, an anus, a penis, your scrotum, your balls, and your breasts, your nipples, and really kind of putting those words in, because if something does happen, children need to be able to use accurate language. God forbid something happen, though.
Right. Well, and that was the conversation my husband and I had, because I was like, because my friend was saying she was torn between the pocketbook and the flower. And I was
God,
like,
no, stop right there. I know that was a visceral reaction, but I want to make it very clear to your friend, to you, for you to tell your friend and all your friends, never a pocketbook. Because now what we're doing is we're associating a monetary value on a body part. And while it doesn't seem like very much now when they're children, we have to understand how the brain learns. Brains learn by building upon base knowledge. If the base knowledge you're giving a child is a pocketbook for their genitalia, that is the foundation. And then from there, all the messages, and you have to remember, not all those messages are going to come from you. They're going to
right,
come from music and television and what they see in the streets and what they hear in the streets and what other little badass kids in kindergarten is saying to them. So it's important, never, never, never a monetary item. Never. I know that some people might be like, well, damn, she really kind of came out of pocket there. But it's important because like you have 2 and 3-year-olds. For many years, I worked with 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 to like 24-year-olds. And when they have that association, it becomes hard to disassociate when they become older.
right. I mean, I can see that with little things now. So our our daughters are 7, and I guess they're both 7 now. And and you look at the things that they've learned and how they made connections on their own that you didn't make for them. And so
Yeah,
when
my
she
mm-hmm.
yeah, so when she said that, I was like, well, I don't subscribe to that one. But I for me it's awkward because I never had that conversation with anyone. Like, I have older brother and sister, and even they didn't say anything about anything The most I can really recall was probably middle school, was when the first friend of mine got pregnant. And so there was whispering around the school, but still no adult said anything. And so it was just kind of like, oh, she got pregnant and then she disappeared. And then she came back like the next school year. And it was like, oh, you're back. And no STI talk. Definitely
Or,
nothing about pleasure.
or consent.
Oh, no, 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 not at
Such a
all.
such a shame. I mean, I think honestly, we continue to fail our youth when we take into consideration that, there are only 39 states and the District of Columbia that mandate sex education and or HIV education. However, the standards by which those sex education programs are deployed is really determined by the school board and area kind of local politicians and politics and school board members and so on and so forth. And it doesn't actually state that, those 39 states need to have HIV education and sex education, right? Only 9 states in the US mandate HIV education. And so, now we're just talking nuts and bolts. When we think about what it takes to really do a great job at educating youth around sexuality, not just the genital act, but also things like gender identity, gender expression, body image, how we feel in our bodies, our communication skills, our understanding of consent. That takes way more than just HIV education or pregnancy prevention or risk reduction. There are so many nuanced things that go without context when it comes to sexuality because we lack quality sex education in the US.
Right. Well, and you've said it on so many occasions. And so for anybody that's listening, if you don't know who Michelle Hope is, then dog it, go check out her TEDx, check out her website, check out her IG, check her out, because when she says that she is an unapologetic sexpert, she's telling you the truth. That's what she for real is. With the whole school situation, um, because that's what you do, you educate people. What can we do as parents to advocate for our kids to get the schools to do a better job?
I'm so glad you asked, um, because I think we're in an election year, right? So there are all these things we can do. And I want to be very clear when you say, because, some people who don't know me, they hear unapologetic sexologist and they only think about the act of sex. I really focus to drill it into people. My saying is this: from the womb to the tomb, sexuality is a part of your everyday life. And again, sexuality is a part of what makes us human. It is a part of our holistic humanity and our existence as humans. So what can you do as parents? Well, it is an election year. You need to become familiar with, not just our presidential election, but also down ballot candidates. Who is going to the Senate on behalf of, like what constituency are you a part of? And what does that person believe about reproductive rights? So you can start there.
Mm-hmm.
2021 in New York is city elections. I have a feeling it's like that across the nation. Right now, because people are getting ready to run for local elections, call them, ask them, what are your views on sex education in schools? You can Google all kinds of data to find out how there is a direct correlation between sex education, sexuality, and academic outcomes, right? Which also play into, especially around like sexual behavior and onset of first experience with sexual behavior and academic outcomes. There is directly correlated, and there is a lot of data out there. Furthermore, we know that there is data that talks about academic achievement in specific communities and how that connects to the pipeline to prison. Okay, I want to be very clear that sexuality permeates not just genitals and bedrooms, but also classrooms. When we start to look at how young Black girls are oftentimes adultified in the eyes of their white school teachers or white administrations at the school. Again, there's data. Listen, in God we trust. Everybody else come to me with data. That's what I like. I like that. And we know that Black girls experience nationwide, I think this number is about 2.5 times the dress code infractions that their white counterparts receive. And that is a part of the adultification of young Black girls, as well as the hypersexualization of Black women's bodies, Black and brown women's bodies. Direct correlation. So you have to become an individual. And if you are not a parent, you also need to be aware of what's going on in the school in your local community. We have to get back to the basics with the idea that it takes a village to raise a child. And if you live in a community with a school, especially a high school, you probably should know what their graduation rates are. And if they're not good, you need to contact whoever you need to contact, whether you are a parent or not, because that impacts your community. There is research done that communities that have higher graduation rates of high school have lower incidents of violent crime. Direct correlation here, people. And until we can start to recognize how sexuality in its holistic fashion permeates all aspects of our lives, we can't start to make a change. So as parents, as community members, you should find out who's running for school superintendent, and you ask, what sex education programs do you have? And if they're like, well, we don't need one because we're elementary, you then say, what type of inclusionary practices do you have for family members and students who may identify as LGBTQ plus? Okay. How are we teaching inclusion, diversity, and acceptance of diversity? How are we teaching tolerance in our schools?
Right.
This is important, right?
Right. Yeah.
It is important for us. Again, I'll say it. Who protects us? We protect us. And that means as a member of a community, it is your responsibility that all students get the opportunity to have equal access to education. And if there are students, and trust me when I say it, again, almost 18 years in education, there are students in elementary who are already feeling as though they may identify as being attracted to the same sex. How do we keep the school safe for them? Because if the school is not safe for them, then it's really not safe for your heteronormative child either. And it's just like what we've been doing all summer with marching and fighting for the Black Lives Matter movement. We must fight to protect the most marginalized of our community and understand that by protecting the most marginalized, we are protecting all of us. So I know that seems, someone might be like, wow, that's way high level to something as simple as sex ed. But again, let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. How do we learn? We have base knowledge, and then we build upon that base knowledge. So we want to teach inclusion and tolerance in elementary school. We want to teach about family diversity in kindergarten. And there's all kinds of resources. Robbie Harris is an incredible book author, writes a lot about sexuality, sexual health, who's in my family. So, because this goes, and some people are like, well, I don't believe in LGBTQ families. That's cool. It's not a part of your religion, but what is tolerance and acceptance.
Right.
So you have to think about, how do you want your child accepted, included? And then you should be able to extend that out to all people, to all families, to all children. I tell you what, if the adults of this world could grasp this, because children don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's us that messes things up.
Definitely. It's true. It's so true. And that's why when I realized that it was Sexual Health Month, and I'm like, okay, who can I find that is willing to have these tough conversations? Because they're not easy, but they should be, because like you said, this is a part of our everyday life. Everything revolves around our sexuality. But we somehow manage to skirt around that and, duck and dodge and hide and pretend.
Well, I think that the reason we duck and dodge it is because most of us have trauma. And trauma in the space of sexuality doesn't necessarily have to do with touch or you've been assaulted. It could be as simple as you hit puberty before everybody else in your grade and your voice started cracking way early, or you had bigger breasts than everybody, or you had one breast that was much larger than the other breast, and so you were made fun of, or you had thick thighs, or you got stretch marks too soon. So it could be, or you were like me, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and so there was a lot of shame around sex or any kind of sexual anything. And I know that in Black communities, my experience has been this, what you said earlier, this kind of prude type of, you know, we don't talk about that. We don't, that's the, you better be prim and proper. But what we have to remember, and here's the kicker, this is all rooted in white supremacy. And we don't think about it like that. You think about Africa, and you think about breasts are exposed always in a lot of tribes. Men are wearing loincloths, totally normal. There is this inclusion of multiple wives and multiple like lovers, and there's not a lot of question. So what we have allowed to happen is that we have allowed our oppressor to indoctrinate us into a way that we now oppress each other. And it's like, it is, the psychology behind it is so deep and so deeply rooted into white supremacy and the dominance of white people. For example, a part of the reason your parents never had a conversation with you about your body or about puberty is because their parents didn't, and their parents didn't. And it goes back to this idea, you have to be connected to the church, you can't show skin, you can't, but that is because Black women have been overly sexually objectified since we were brought here. We talk about how Black people, you know, built this nation on their backs. I will challenge you and say, Black women birthed this nation through their hips in so many ways. And when your body has been hypersexualized as a breeder, a use as a sex object for the master, a way for science to push forward in things like gynecology because you were used as an experimental subject, it becomes fearful almost for us to have conversations about sexuality, to give our young daughters confidence in their sexuality, because forever we have been hypersexualized. And when your body just going through puberty or previous to puberty becomes hypersexualized, the very uttering of the word vagina or period becomes a bad thing. So then we don't talk about periods, we don't talk about fibroids, we don't talk about breast cancer, because those body parts have been so exploited and hypersexualized by white supremacy.
Wow.
And that's just female. Like, I got a whole other situation for men, because we're not talking about the sexual assault that occurs to young Black boys in our community. Instead, we have somehow normalized this idea that older women getting with younger Black men is some sort of crossing over into manhood. And so we don't allow a space for men to be vulnerable enough to say, this happened to me and it hurt. So they become more callous. And I suspect that they then struggle with this idea of consent. You know, one of the reasons teaching body autonomy is really important to me is because in the United States, Black and brown people, for the most part, have never actually had body autonomy. That is a white privilege. Because when you can walk down the street and be stopped by a police officer and be frisked for no reason, because when you get frisked, they touch you in all your private spaces. That means you don't really have body autonomy. So you can't quite understand consent as deeply as we need you to, because at any moment, law, institution can break that and say, well, this, you know, I was afraid of you. I saw you as a threat. And we're afraid for our lives. So sexual health and understanding deeply sexuality is like on the most back burner, when we can die just by walking while Black. So it's like this cycle that just it makes things worse.
Now I'm scared. It's like, oh
Yeah,
my gosh. Oh,
that was
talk
not
about
just
mind
all the
blown.
other parents are scared now too.
Well, it just make us diligent. We'll just have to do our due diligence and get out there and do the right thing, because I mean, it's not going to get any better if we don't do anything about it. it if we sit idly on the side, then nobody's going to come to our rescue. We gotta do this on our own.
Yep. And it takes a lot of work. I don't envy parents. Because because we have to, as parents and as stakeholders and in the people who guide young people through life, we have to face our own traumas around sexuality so we can have frank, honest discussions to our young people. And then we also have to accept that we don't have children to decide who they will be as adults. We have children to love them. And as a part of that love, it is our job to give them the foundational principles and build them that toolbox so they can make the healthiest decisions for their life, because it's not ours. We might have brought them in and we might make jokes about how we can take them out, but it's up to us to give them that solid foundation. Let them know that we want you to go out and explore, but home is always a safe place to come back, no matter what the trauma, no matter what the drama, no matter what the hot tea is.
Mhm.
We will have respite for you. We might be mad, but we will have respite for you, and we will figure out how to solve this problem. And I say that to any of your listeners who have middle schoolers and or high schoolers, because a part of them acting out is just a part of normal adolescent development. It's a part of them growing up.
Right. Well, for me, you mentioned about the trauma of possibly developing early or whatever, all of those different possibilities. And I, in a way, I almost want to say I was lucky that I was the opposite. I was not that girl. I was the friend of that girl, but even being the friend of that girl, I was still put in situations where the friend needed to go to see the guy. You bring your other friend to then entertain their friend. And so although I wasn't the hot commodity, I was the friend of the friend that ended
He
up
was the
in.
wingman. The wingman.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which didn't make
And
it any better.
but even at that, like the experience of not being or in that situation, you are a prize, but having to experience being the wing woman all the time, it's like one of those, like always a bridesmaid, never the bride.
Hmm.
So what does that do to your developing sense of relationships and where you see yourself in relationships? All of these things can have a direct impact on how we view sex, love, and relationships.
This is so true. Now, question for you. What is a topic revolving around sexual health that you think people need to talk about more? There needs to be more discussion on it.
All of it. But if I had to, but if I had to, like probably boil it down, and I think again, I think all of it is important because we have to normalize the conversation, right? But I think in the TED Talk, I told a story about, because I bartended in grad school, and I've always worked in urban settings, Black and brown communities. That's my, and I would tell people what I did. And what I always found interesting was people would get comfortable, especially after a couple drinks, and then they would tell me these things. And if I had a nickel for every, and this is terrible, but for every man who would disclose his experience with sexual assault as a young person, I would I'd be driving a Tesla. And so while we talk about, I really think just consent and sex, like they're dark topics. That's why I just usually say everything, just so we can like have some levity sometimes. But the idea of consent and experiencing sexual violence or sexual assault and what that is and what that's not, especially for cisgendered heteronormative men of color, is, I worry about that because my trained eye sees a lot, even when, people are trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to find ways to have those conversations.
I will be the first one to admit there are a whole lot of names of groups, categories of people that I don't understand. I can't distinguish one from the other. And where do you go to get the education on? I mean, because I don't ever want to make anyone feel uncomfortable or bad to say the wrong thing, because like now I'm noticing on people's social media they're identifying what their pronouns are.
Well, don't
And
worry. You can't worry about messing up. If you
no,
mess up, you say, okay, I'm sorry, I'll get it right. I have a friend, I have a lot of trans friends and a lot of gender non-conforming friends. I have one friend, I mess it up all the time because I met them in one space in their life where they identified as one pronoun. And then I have been friends with the person as they have transitioned. So oftentimes, while they choose to, they request that we refer to them as them, they, I sometimes be like, girl, let me tell you something. But that is not in any shape, form, or fashion. And I
not just
sometimes use the wrong name. And and they have enough grace to say, Michelle, I get it. But I think that one, I always encourage anybody who has, if you have a signature on your email, add your pronouns because it shows that you're accepting of all people's pronouns. You might not totally understand why, but it's not for you to understand why. It's for you to just respect the boundary. And if you get it wrong, that's okay.
okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll fix it next time. It's
Okay,
just,
so
you're fine. Exactly.
okay.
Give yourself grace. It's fine.
I heard you talking about, I want to say it was during the time period that you were bartending, where you said that you had met this guy and you had a conversation with him and then he saw you on the street and thanked
Oh,
you
yes.
because him and his friends got together and had that discussion about how they had treated women when they were in college. And what did you say to him to get that kind of response? Because I need to have that conversation with a lot of people, because when I think back to college,
Oh, yeah.
ugh,
Yeah. So, yeah, it's icky. It's an icky feeling to think back to those days for a lot of us. Um, and I think that it wasn't just one conversation, it
no,
was numerous. Like, it was, and that's why I said, when you asked me, what's the one thing we can talk about? Just talk about sexuality, generally speaking, right? Because what will happen is naturally, the more conversations you have and the more you normalize those conversations, the easier, more difficult conversations will be. Um, and I think that you have to let people, you got to meet people where they are. And once again, give them grace. Because sometimes people say the most ignorant things. And I used to get mad. Now I just draw a firm line like, you know what? Not around me. We're not saying that. If I've had a few drinks, it could be a little bit more stern. Like, see, what we not going to do is, or I'm going to stop you right there because this is not a healthy conversation. Um, and it's just challenging yourself to have more of those conversations
mhm,
and be more open-minded and be, at the end of the day, here's the deal. Whatever anybody chooses to do in their bedroom, as long as it's with another consenting adult, it really don't pay it. It don't have nothing to do with you.
right.
Doesn't mean you can't learn from someone's experience, but you want to go into those conversations non-judgmental. And as you're sitting there and you're listening or engaging and you feel feelings of judgment or anger come up, you need to go back in with self and ask yourself, exactly is coming up for me here? What button did that just push? And where in my past did I experience something that made me ultra sensitive to that? So you have to do your own work.
Ooh, definitely. Oh my gosh. It's gonna be people are gonna be real upset with me because we about to start having some serious conversations.
No and know your environment. Like I always like to say, if you want to have a real tough conversation with people, because right now with the news and the president and there are so many things that you can just bring up in recent history. I mean, even the massive amount of hysterectomies, ICE detention centers,
Yes, I
finding
saw that.
that is from the white man's playbook. Come on now. Look up Dr. Sims. Dr. Sims used slave women to experiment on. You look throughout the American Medical Association's history, and you'll see tons of examples of where they, you know, sterilized women of color through all crooks and ducks and bucks and all kind of like testing birth control, giving it out like Tic Tacs when they weren't sure what it. I mean, there is a very deep history of reproductive oppression against women of color in the United States, and so you should bring that up, and then you can move that conversation to abortion rights and abortion care. And sometimes, you know, if you are in a very religious community or in a very conservative space, people may get up in arms. And then that's your opportunity to educate them to the fact that women should have the choice to decide on their own. You take it back to reproductive justice, right?
Yeah.
And the principles that state all women should have the right to choose how to bring a life into the world and by what nature they will give birth. All women, people have the right to prevent pregnancy and terminate pregnancy if necessary. And then the third one, which really relates back to the Black Lives Matter movement, is that as a part of reproductive justice, individuals should have safe and sustainable communities to raise the children they already have in.
Amen.
Without fear
Yes.
of violence brought on by an individual, an organization, or an institution, or the government. And we are not living in a world that has realized reproductive justice. So, you know, you start in one space. Another great thing to do is, I used to do this in my class, and I still do this on my IG chats. I look up what kind of sex is in the news. You know, I put in a word associated with sexuality into Google, and then I just click news to see what's going on. It's really interesting. You can put in like intimate partner violence, click news, and you'll see how intimate partner violence has skyrocketed since the pandemic. You could put in trans rights, click the news, and you'll see how to date, 31 trans people have been murdered in the United States, the highest number thus far per year. Every year, those numbers continue to go up. You know, you could look up COVID plus sex, click news, and you'll find out recommendations put out by the CDC on how to have sex. So there's all kinds of things you can do just to educate yourself if you're interested, because it's fascinating. At least for me, it is.
Wow. Well, this conversation has been fascinating. Let me just say thank you again for agreeing to come on the show and have a little sexual health talk for the month. And we're definitely going to keep these conversations going. If you would, can you share how people can reach you?
Absolutely. You can follow me on all social media sites at MH Sexpert. So Michelle Hope Sexpert, MH Sexpert. My website, www.mhsexpert. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter, and you know, just kind of stay around, stay out and about, and keep an eye on me because I'm here.
Yes, and you got, oh, hold on now, IG, Just the Tip Tuesday.
Oh, yes, I forgot. How do I forget Just the Tip Tuesday? Every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, I do a conversation. This last week, we had Queen Jean who is a costume designer, activist, trans activist here in New York, a phenomenal woman, was so brilliant, so eloquent, and just really fighting for trans liberation and Black trans lives.
I absolutely love Just a Tip Tuesday. So, although I missed when you did the when you made the vibrator, I missed that.
I need to post that on my YouTube. I also have a YouTube channel, so I'm learning all these new tech spaces. So it's been good.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep an eye out for that one because I'm very interested.
Awesome. Awesome.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it.